Hello, children. This week, as part of our transition activities from Cambridge class to Oxford class, we're going to spend a bit more time looking at grammar in a little bit more detail. This will help you when you move into year 6, as at the end of year 6, of course, we will have our grammar tests. So this week, we're going to look at clauses and phrases in a little bit more detail. Now, before we get started, it might be a good idea to go and get a pencil and some paper. Pause the video while you do that. Okay, so today we're going to look at what is a clause. Think about that carefully. We talk about clauses a lot. We've talked about relative clauses. You've done subordinating conjunctions and subordinate clauses with Mrs. Callahan. We talk about clauses quite a lot. What is a clause? Let's have a look. So a clause can be a simple statement, but it must include a verb. So a clause can be a simple statement, but it must include a verb. So you could say something like, he was excited. I've got a verb in there, was. There's my simple statement. He was excited. You could say, it was left out. I've got a verb in there, was. It was left out. So a clause is a simple statement including a verb. It can make sense on its own. So the tea went cold. It makes sense on its own. The tea went cold. And it can be called a simple sentence. If it makes sense on its own, it can be called a simple sentence. So you could say, for example, the boy danced. The tea went cold. So they make sense on their own. It was left is a clause, but it doesn't really make sense on its own. And he was excited is a clause. It doesn't really make sense on its own. So let's look at a little bit more detail. Clauses are divided into main clauses and subordinate clauses. Main clauses and subordinate clauses. Main clauses make sense on their own. Subordinate clauses don't. So a main clause makes sense on its own, but a subordinate clause doesn't. So listen carefully. The tea went cold. I wonder whether that's a main clause or a subordinate clause. Listen again. The tea went cold. That's right, it's a main clause. What about this one? It was left. No, we don't know what the it is, we don't know where it was left, but it is a clause because it's got a verb in there, was. So it's a subordinate clause. So clauses are divided into two groups, main clauses and subordinate clauses. Here's my main clause. The chicken crossed the road. Here's my main clause. The chicken crossed the road, and here's my chicken crossing the road. So I can add some additional information to my sentence in terms of a subordinate clause, but remember I must include a verb. So here's some examples. The chicken crossed the road because, subordinating conjunction, you know those, it was hungry. And it was hungry is my second clause. The chicken crossed the road because it was hungry. Or I could say, the chicken crossed the road when the cars had gone. Or I could say, the chicken crossed the road before it was too late. And if we look here, we've got our verbs. Was, had gone, past perfect, and was. Because it was hungry when the cars had gone, before it was too late. And we can add them to the end of the sentence. The chicken was hungry because the chicken crossed the road because it was hungry. Or we could say, the chicken crossed the road when the cars had gone. Or we could say, the chicken crossed the road before it was too late. Now, we can put the subordinate clause that starts with a subordinating conjunction at the beginning of the sentence, but this time we'd need a comma, wouldn't we? Because it was hungry, comma, the chicken crossed the road. When the cars had gone, comma, the chicken crossed the road. Before it was too late, comma, the chicken crossed the road. So if my second clause, if my subordinate clause starts with a subordinating conjunction, it can go at the end of the sentence, or it can go at the beginning of the sentence. But there are other types of subordinate clause. We've got those there that start with a subordinating conjunction. There are other types of subordinate clause. Look at this one here. You should recognise what this one is. It's a subordinate clause, but this one does not start with subordinating conjunction. It starts with a relative pronoun. That's right, the word here is that, the relative pronoun. And was feeling, past progressive form. The chicken crossed the road that was feeling reckless. No, this relative clause is describing the subject of our sentence, the chicken. So this relative clause wouldn't go at the end. It would slide itself in here because it's describing the chicken. The chicken that was feeling reckless crossed the road. So we can have subordinate clauses that start with a subordinating conjunction, and they can go at the end or at the beginning of the sentence, or we could have a relative clause that describes the noun, and if it goes in the middle of the sentence, it's described as an embedded clause. It goes in the middle of the sentence, it is an embedded clause. Okay, so I've got a T-Rex here, and my main clause is the T-Rex roared. And there's my verb, look, roared. The T-Rex roared. Before I show you what I've got under here, I might give you my subordinating conjunctions. I think I've got as, because, and until. Would you like to have a go at writing the rest of this sentence? The T-Rex roared as, the T-Rex roared because, the T-Rex roared until. So pause the video and have a go. Okay, let's have a look at this. Let's make my T-Rex a little bit smaller. Hide him out the way for a moment. Okay, the T-Rex roared as the raptor walked past. The T-Rex roared because it was hungry. I'm going to move him out of the way so I've got a bit more space. Because it was hungry. The T-Rex roared, too many T's there, until it settled down. T-Rex roared until it settled down. Now, because these clauses here start with a subordinating conjunction, we know that we could put them at the beginning of the sentence, but then we need a comma. As the raptor walked past, comma, the T-Rex roared. Because it was hungry, comma, the T-Rex roared. Until it settled down, comma, the T-Rex roared. Okay, those are our sentences that start with a subordinate, clauses that start with a subordinated conjunction. Here's my relative clause. That was bad-tempered. It's not going at the end because it's relative. It's connected to the subject of the sentence. The T-Rex that was bad-tempered roared. So it would go in there, and I probably will put commas before and after it because it is an embedded clause. So your job now is to pause the video and have a go at this. You have to decide whether the part that is underlined is the main clause or the subordinate clause. So you're going to have to pause the video and have a really good think. Is it the main clause or the subordinate clause? Okay, let's have a look. There we go. How did you get on? This is an interesting one here because Oh, well, that's no good. Those are the wrong answers, aren't they? It's not going to help us. We better do it together. I paid the driver is the main clause. Eat at sizzling sausages because the food is great, subordinate clause. Because it is raining, I took my raincoat with me. The delivery man knocked on the door. They stared at the view from the window because it reminded them of home. We will go to the cinema if you tidy your room. I'm going to the shops, that's my main clause. Put a cross next to it if you know the correct answer. It should be fine because I checked, that's the main clause. Put on your coat, that is the main clause. If it doesn't arrive, go to the shop. Now, can you see my subordinating conjunctions at the beginning there? So go to the shops is still the main clause. I hope you didn't fall for that one. Kate went straight home after school, main clause. Tomorrow morning, when the clock strikes 9, school will begin. It is a subordinate clause, but it's also embedded. Can you see? Embedded. Yeah. Tomorrow morning, when the clock strikes 9, school will begin. And it's embedded because it's acting as an adverbial. It's telling us a little bit more about the time there. I love ice cream when I have finished reading my book. Go. When she'd eaten her lunch, she walked for an hour. You can stand up when the Queen enters the room. Gosh, how did you get on there? Right, to help us to remember, we've got another little song. Now, you'll find it at this address on YouTube, and we might just have to move on the advert when we have a look at it.
This is a life book. To many people, it's the most important book on their shelf. But you
two types of clause, main and subordinate. There are two types of clause, main and subordinate, but only one makes sense on its own. It's the main clause, but only one makes sense on its own. A main clause is a finished sentence. We know what the sentence is about. A main clause has a subject, that's the thing the sentence is about. The king ate his cheese, the hall looks very nice. My cats played the violin on their boat. Your dog is cute, Tom cut off his hair. The big evil goat ran away. There are two types of clause, main and subordinate. There are two types of clause, main and subordinate, but only one makes sense on its own. It's the main clause, but only one makes sense on its own. A subordinate clause is extra information. It doesn't make sense on its own. A subordinate clause must start with a subordinating conjunction. After, although, as, because, before, due to, once, since, unless, though. After, although, as, because, before, due to, once, since, unless, though. Until, when, if, while, whether. Until, when, if, while, whether. Until, when, if, while, whether. Until, when. Although my house is big, unless it rains, because I fell over the chestnut tree. After you finished your very long run, once I learned how to do a backflip. There are two types of clause, main and subordinate. There are two types of clause, main and subordinate, but only one makes sense on its own. It's the main like serial subordinate. Although it is boring, main. The carpet is dirty, subordinate. Since you are messy, main. The princess lost her crown, subordinate. As she doesn't always think, main. You never do your homework, subordinate. Unless you're given sweets. There are two types of clause, main and subordinate. There are two types of clause, main and subordinate. But only one makes sense on its own. But only one makes sense on its own.
So I'm hoping you found that useful. You can always go back and listen to it again. You've got a little job to do now. There are two jobs to do. The first job is I've written some sentences here about the scarlet macaw. It says these birds are found in the Amazon rainforest. Most scarlet macaws are intelligent, sociable birds. They eat nuts and fruit. Macaws fly long distances, so I can see 1, 2, 3, 4 full stops. There are 4 sentences there. And the scarlet macaw down here has given you a job to do. It says add subordinate clauses to each of the sentences. You can add them at the beginning or the end, or you can embed them in the sentence. So you can either add them at the beginning or the end, or you can embed them into the sentence. So you're going to pause the video and you're going to have a think about adding subordinate clauses to my short paragraph about the scarlet macaw. Remember, you can use subordinating conjunctions or you could use relative pronouns. Pause the video and have a go. Okay, if you've done that, it would be really good if you could send that to me so that I can see it. But before you do, there's one more job. You've got a choice now. You can choose one of these animals. So you've got a red-eyed tree frog or a sloth. And each sentence, I want you to write 3 sentences about the animal. So choose one animal and write 3 sentences. Each sentence should have a subordinate clause in a different place. One sentence will need the subordinate clause at the beginning, and one sentence will need an embedded clause, and one will need a subordinate clause at the end. So that's the beginning, the middle, and the end. You can choose what sentences you want to write and how you want to extend those sentences with subordinate clauses. And when you've done that, you can take a photograph of that and this activity too and email them to me. Tomorrow, we're going to look at the difference between a clause and a phrase.